we can kind of dissect it. We got Brother C. Brown here, Jason, and Nephilim Free, so we'd be happy to analyze some of what you think is the best evidence for evolution. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, I'll probably just bring up some of these points that I brought up last time that unfortunately we didn't really get a whole lot of discussion since there was a lot of nastiness in our last stuff. So if you want to, maybe I can just bring up some of the fossil stuff that I tried to bring up last time before everything got all chaotic. Does that sound good to you, Standing?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was on mute. Yeah, I mean, if you just have a couple points or a few sentences you wanted to make now, and we can kind of, give the floor to C. Brown, Nephilim Free, Jason. I mean, we'll just keep it a free-flowing dialogue here. I'm mostly hosting, but I may have a few things to say. But yeah, we'll just keep it easy going, kind of back and forth. So, I mean, hey, the floor is yours, David. Whatever you want to start with.
Yeah. Sure. So hold on 1 minute. Let me get up my PowerPoint and my notes and all. So yeah, I guess I'll just start off real quick by reminding everyone the definitions of evolution. Basically, the evolution is a change in the allele frequencies in the gene pool, also known as descent with modification, and of course, as changes accumulate in the population, new species are formed, much like how languages are formed and how languages evolve over time. So that's basically how evolution works. We have seen speciation numerous times, and we and Answers in Genesis, Standing for Truth, Nephilim 3. Do you guys accept that speciation happens at least to an extent?
Well, that's an interesting story about changing allele frequencies and variations that create new species. But what is a species? There is a thing in science called the species problem, wherein evolutionary biologists virtually universally agree that it's difficult, if not impossible, to define what constitutes a species. But even if we agree that speciation occurs, and I agree that changes, organisms do change, that there is variety, certainly within the original created kinds, what changes occur to organisms that would cause us to believe that the organisms move towards becoming a fundamentally different type of organism? Because I'll just tell you that there's no scientific evidence for that.
Can I just interject? Sorry, David. What's a kind?
I'm sorry. Yeah, that's what I was just about to say. What exactly?
Well, how about you answer my question first?
Yeah, hold on. Let me answer Neff's question, because Neff, I think that's a really good question, and it's a good point. So basically, species is basically, I consider the biological species concepts, a population of organisms that can interbreed and produce fertile offspring. And as you mentioned, it is very difficult to actually define species, and there is a big gray area. For example, tigers and lions, are they separate species? They can sometimes interbreed, and it is it's very difficult to interbreed them. So where exactly is that species line? That is very blurred in some cases, and that's exactly what we would expect if evolution were true. If evolution were true in universal common descent, it should be difficult to identify exactly when one species speciates into another species. So again, Neff, what exactly is a kind?
I would say a kind is species. The term species was originally designed by a creationist to describe the original created kinds. Evolutionists have usurped the term since then and used it for evolutionary purposes. But the question, you didn't actually answer the question that I asked. I asked what kind of changes occur in speciation that demonstrate to us an organism is moving towards becoming a fundamentally different type of organism, because that's the kind of change evolution posits. If organisms don't move towards becoming a fundamentally different type of organism, then they remain fundamentally the same organism, and there's no tree of life, there's no concept of It's pointless to talk about common ancestry. See what I mean?
Right.
So we have to observe, if we're going to say evolution is science, we have to observe that there are changes that occur in organisms that move them towards becoming a fundamentally different type of organism. In other words, there has to be change to the structural design of the organism, anatomical change that moves them towards being something fundamentally different. What kind of changes are ever observed in biology that should lead us to believe this process occurs?
Okay, sure. So I guess what do you mean by fundamentally different kind of organism?
Oh,
And hold on a sec, let me finish.
oh boy.
So as Aaron Ra explains all the time, you don't grow out of your ancestry. You always are what your ancestors are. Humans are a subset of apes. Apes are a subset of primates, which are a subset of mammals, and so forth. You don't grow out of your ancestry. At no point does one kind of organism change into something fundamentally different.
Okay.
Can I ask a
That
question?
is man.
You're misrepresenting what creationists believe about evolution for the purpose of avoiding my question. You didn't actually answer my question. Creationists don't believe that.
Oh my God.
Creationists don't believe that fish become amphibian tetrapods. We believe that, like evolutionists do, that the theory posits that successive generations change a little bit, and each one of these moves towards becoming a fundamentally different type of organism, ultimately resulting in a fundamentally different type of organism. But I asked you what kind of changes occur that demonstrate that process to us, and I haven't heard you answer me yet.
Okay, so, sure. So let me ask, what type of stages would you accept for that? And
so that's what's happening. You see, this happens a lot when the tough questions are put forth that actually bring the question into the theory. What's the actual evidence for the theory? Instead of answering the questions, evolutionists resort in this.
Right. Okay.
Skirting the answer and asking their own endless series of questions, ultimately hoping to divert the question to some other thing.
No, it's okay.
I can answer that question for him. I can answer that question.
Answer the question.
Can I answer that question for him?
I would like him to answer it, since I asked it of him. I don't want to let him off the hook.
Yeah, sure. So, C. Brown, you can, of course, interject and add your own thing if you want, and anyone else.
I just want to ask you this question. So, basically, you're looking for evidence that would suggest that one species can evolve into a completely different species. Is that the question you're asking?
That generations of creatures do this, not that a particular species, because it can't remain the same species if evolution is true.
Well, let me ask you a question. What environmental pressures you would expect that would evolve a chimp into a human? What do you think was the underlying selective pressures that made this evolution occur?
So this is what always happens. Instead of getting an answer to the question, because it's hard, you actually have to have evidence for evolution if you're going to do this. Instead of getting an answer to the question, we get more questions. I would just prefer that since David said that changes to allele frequency result in variations that produce fundamentally different type of organisms. I know he didn't use that term, but that's what he's alluding. Then what is the evidence for it? I just want the evidence for the claim.
No.
So you didn't come here to debate evolution with evidence. You just came here to tell us a storyline and expect us to swallow it, right?
Are you familiar with the Socratic method?
I just want an answer to my question.
We can get there.
Well, give me that first, and then go on with other stuff.
No.
No? Okay. Well, you and I are done talking until David answers my question.
Can you stop talking?
Let him hang himself. Nephilim, let him hang himself. Go ahead, hang yourself.
Okay, what we're doing is using the Socratic method. We're going to ask a bunch of questions.
Yeah, I don't go for that.
Oh, you're done.
Right.
Okay, hold on. I don't play this game. Actually, you really don't have to go that far off base, honestly. Meet us halfway. I understand your method because you want to dilute it with a whole bunch of stuff that's unnecessary. So, and definitely want to come straight to the point. So I tell you what, meet us halfway. Just give us what environmental pressures evolved a ape into a human? Just let us know what happened.
That's not
How
good
did they get?
Just give it a go, Neff.
David,
He can't even do that though. But
David,
he
just
but
tell
Netflix,
us
he
what
can't
is
do
the
that.
evidence. What is the evidence that this process occurs?
We are about to explore that if you explore it with us.
I'm asking David. He made the claim. Please let David answer.
Sure. So if I may, can I actually share my PowerPoint and share my screen?
Sure.
I couldn't care less so long as you answer my question.
Thank you, David.
Sure. Okay, sure. So let's get to the point. Chimps never became humans. Humans did not descend from chimps. Chimps and humans do share a common ancestor, and that can be found, and the evidence for that is in the fossil record, and the evidence for that is in genetics as well. So let's begin by taking a look at the evidence for common descent and common ancestry, some of the issues. Common design, you can't observe it. It's not observable or testable. You can't falsify it. Well, you can observe and test common ancestry. This is wrong, by the way, completely and utterly wrong. So again, let's begin with Lucy, the Australopithecus afarensis, lived between 3.85 and 2.95 million years ago. Her species is represented by over 400 individuals. They were fully bipedal. They were definitely not chimps, and they had a brain size that was 380 to 430 centimeters cubed, which is about 1/3 that of a modern human. Homo heidelbergensis and
No, hold on, come on, hold on. Let's take one point at a time. I mean, you really can't go through it. We really don't want to be educated like that because you're just spreading a whole bunch of information. First of all, you just said Australopithecus is represented by 400 something individuals. Now, we're not talking about specimens. We're not talking about bones. You're telling me that you got empirical evidence that you have 430 something examples of different Australopithecus fossils. You have that, or are you just talking about specimens which refer to one single bone? What do you have?
So we have about 400 specimens we have fossils from about 400 separate individuals. But again,
no, you don't. No, you don't. No, you don't. Because the most you have, let me just say one thing, and then you can continue. Because we can't. I don't want no long pressed out where you throw a whole lot of information. We don't have time to attack it directly. Okay, you do not have 400 species or creatures. You have a certain amount of specimens. If that was the case, you would have a complete fossil of Lucy, and you absolutely do not have it. So you don't have that. I need for you to show evidence that you have that many creatures, or just admit that you have that many specimens, which is actual bones.
That's what I just said. We have 400 specimens of from 400 different individuals. Let me actually.
No. It's not individuals. It's not individuals. Don't say individuals anymore, please.
More than 300 individuals. What's your evidence? My citation is the Smithsonian Institute Human Origins. Have uncovered remains for more than 300 individuals.
Okay, hold up. So this is what you're telling me. You're telling me you have like 400 and something individuals, but you got at the most 40% skeletons, and that's only if you presuppose the left side over the right side. You're missing a lot of bones. If you have 400 and something individuals, you would easily, it is so obvious that you would have at least 20 different complete skeletons if you got that many.
For this to be true, there's three things you must have. You must have examples of species living today that show, by examination of their anatomy, that their physiology is changing towards becoming a fundamentally different type of organism. We don't know of any. You must also have fossil evidence that the organisms transition into fundamentally different types of organisms. We don't have any. You must also have a genetic mechanism whereby we can see that genetic mutation does the kinds of things that can move an organism towards becoming a fundamentally different type of organism, and we don't have that either. So what we have instead is Lucy, which was not bipedal and is not transitional. Lucy had iliac blades of its pelvis that flared sideways, not forward. That means it was not bipedal. It has a highly pronounced brow ridge, which is typical of an ape. It has an elongated temporal bone or zygomatic process. That's typically ape. It has a pronounced muzzle or maxillia. That's also typically ape. It was chinless, the absence of the mental protuberance. That's also distinctly ape. It had eye sockets and shape is specifically ape. The foramen magnum is towards the rear of the skull, not dead center. It has a distinctly ape brain case. The frontal and pinnate bones are distinctly ape. Has an adjuncted great toe. That's a distinctly ape feature. Has a distinctly ape ear canal. Has a distinctly ape curved toe bones. Has finger bones more curved than those of a chimpanzee. That's distinctly ape. Has distinctly ape teeth, which are longer than wide, whereas humans are wider than long. I mean, the opposite of what I just said. Has distinctly ape wrist bones. Distinctly chimpanzee metacarpals. Distinctly metacarpals, distinctly arboreal humerus, almost done, distinctly arboreal attachment to the shoulder and back muscles, and wrist bones that lock for knuckle walking. Those are the features of an ape, not a transition to humans. So I'm sorry, Lucy doesn't qualify.
So if we lined up,
let's do this. Okay, let's do this, guys, just so everybody can feel like they're making their point. So Brother Neff, he just went on there, made some really solid points. Let's take it to, I'm thinking David. Oh, okay, yeah, go ahead. Your turn. Go ahead.
And then come back to Brother Brown, too.
Yeah. Sure. At this point, we're going to go around the room now. So we'll start with you, P. Tango. Go ahead.
So if we lined up all the specimens of the skulls we have from the most ancient ones to Homo sapien, where would you point and say, no, monkey, ape, maybe human?
Okay, well, P. Tango, at this point, since we're going to be going around the room, you're going to have to make that a rhetorical question because we're now. Are you yielding your time? We're going to move on to the next person.
Yeah, go on.
Okay, so now we'll move it to C. Brown. Go ahead, brother, uninterrupted.
Okay, so I mean, it doesn't make any difference. You know what? A creator created millions of different species. You're going to find some similarities in species, period. You're going to find dogs and cats got similarities. You're going to find humans and chips got similarities. You can't come up with that many different type species and not have underlining type of characteristics. Just like they want to come with the story about the bear dog, okay? Well, a bear and a dog both have limbs. They both have basically a type of cranium. They got a protruding mouthpiece, you know? So basically, when you see these different characteristics of different dogs, if you look at a bull mastiff compared to a chihuahua, you're going to see an extreme amount of variation. So if you want to draw lines and say that, okay, because a human.
Oh, C. Brown, are you there, brother?
Ears, okay, got lips. You know, they both got a little bit. I'm sorry. Okay, so basically, it doesn't matter. It's not about drawing a line. It's about what mechanisms are there that can evolve a chimp into a human. You can't look at similarities because even if you look at DNA, you just can only look at the letters that align. So you really don't have a case. I'm gonna yield my time.
Okay, thank you so much for those points, C. Brown. We'll take it to David Neff, and you have 2 minutes of uninterrupted time.
Excellent, sure. So I want to begin by saying that hominidity, creationists themselves are having a very difficult time determining whether or not some of these species are human or whether or not they're fully ape or whatever. Genesis, for example, has a few articles saying no, they're human, and another saying no, they're not human. ICR again. So this is creationists themselves. They're having a very difficult time with hominidity and seeing all of this. I also want to say that the idea of chimps becoming humans is a straw man. Chimps do not become human. We do share, however, a common. Would you please shut up for a minute, Neff, so I can talk? So again, chimps do not become human. We do have a common ancestor with them, and that can be traced genetically. The same genetic test that we're able to determine who my father could be, and again, we have solid genetic evidence for this, that humans and Neanderthals diverged about 800,000 years ago. Humans and chimps last shared a common ancestor about 7 million years ago, and so forth. So again, that is evidence that we can see in the genetic record as well. And you were talking about the differences, Neff, with the Lucy, and you're right. Lucy did not have a chin, and neither did the Neanderthals. And I'm sure you would say, I don't know if you say that Neanderthals are human or not, but most creationists seem to say that Neanderthals are fully human. So again, Neanderthals don't have a chin. So again, I guess you can see the problem there. So with that, I yield the rest of my time.
Okay, thank you, David. I'm going to go next real quick, and then we'll go to Brother Neff. So the Neanderthals, a lot of these hominins, it's more appropriate to say weaker chins, and this is what you can see in adaptation via the environment. Creationists are not having problems with Homo naledi. They're not having problems with Homo floresiensis, erectus, Neanderthal, heidelbergensis, none of these hominins, because the data now suggests that those so-called pre-humans were not actually pre-human or less than human. They were just members of our own species, 100% human, made in the image of God, who were undergoing accelerated genetic degeneration due to severe and extended inbreed. And we can see this from the secular literature itself. There's paper upon paper that talks about insular dwarfism on remote islands with Homo floresiensis, which explains all of these so-called primitive features, including Naledi. So Naledi is clearly human. When it comes to the Australopithecines, as Brother Neff was pointing out, the Australopithecines share most of their features with living apes today. They're about 3 or 4 feet tall, and the reconstructions on those very, very fragmentary bones, like for example, Lucy was originally found in hundreds of pieces, and they literally had to glue back together all of these pieces in a way that fits evolutionist basic assumptions. And there's tons of papers, even coming from the paleo experts themselves, suggesting the coexistence of the Australopithecines and man. For example, famous paleoanthropologist Richard Leakey, he said, "I see no reason that bands of Homo would not have killed and eaten robust Australopithecines when they could, just as they killed and ate antelopes and other prey animals." Described by the Leakeys themselves, they've discovered with the Australopithecines, anatomically modern humans, supposedly 3 to 4 million years ago, human limb bones, human jaw bones, human hands, human footprints, human foot bones, the footprints, for example, the Laetoli footprints, and the footprints in Crete. And this is all supposedly alongside the Australopithecines. And then one last point with P. Tango, we can easily differentiate with what's human and what is ape. For example, Neanderthals, Naledi, erectus, heidelbergensis, Homo floresiensis, clearly human. A lot of them the result of genetic degeneration and inbreeding. Ardipithecus, clearly an ape. And the Australopithecines like Afarensis, Africanus, Animensis, all ape. And then you've got your mixture, your ghost taxons like Australopithecus sediba and Homo habilis, which are just a mix of human bones and ape bones. And creationists aren't making this up. The paleo experts themselves are agreeing that a lot of these, even some of the Australopithecines, are a mix of human and ape bones. So easily demolish human evolution. And one last point on the genetics. The genetic data does not support human evolution. It actually supports special creation of 2 common ancestors, Adam and Eve. So I yield my time. And actually, if you want, we can jump to P. Tango and then Neff, just to make sure we're going evolutionist, creationist, evolutionist, creationist. So go ahead, P. Tango.
So, like basically, you said it's a mixture of bones, and we're concentrating on skulls at the moment. We're just looking at skulls. It's their backbone, it's their pelvis, it's the way their knees point. All these things point to a group of organisms that just started walking upright and gain new skills.
Are you yielding your time, P. Tango, or did you have anything else to say?
No, go for it.
Okay, Brother Neff, your turn. Take your time, brother, uninterrupted.
Okay, so Neanderthal, as far as genetics can tell us from the bits of DNA they've retrieved from bones, is purely human. So to allude to say, well, humans bred with Neanderthal is a statement assuming that Neanderthal was less human than we are. We don't have any reason to believe that. And also, so we just don't see the fossil evidence. We see apes, and then we don't see, and we have humans. We don't have anything that Afarensis has distinctly ape features. I named a whole slew of them. Evolutionists look at the bones and they make grand assumptions. Take, for example, the Tong child. The evolutionists a couple of decades ago cherished so much as a transitional form, a young, early human being. It was a transition to humans, the earliest pseudo-human that you could have. But look at the picture carefully. Look at that. That's an infant chimpanzee, a young chimpanzee, like a year old, year and a half, and that's the Tong child's skull. Can you see a major difference? I don't see any difference at all. But evolutionists dig up a chimpanzee skull out of the ground, and then they declare, look, this is your ancestor. And they claim it's a transitional form. It doesn't have any features of transition. It's just a chimp skull. That's all it is. And that's what we see with all these fossils. There is no mechanism for evolution. Genetics doesn't provide one. Mutations destroy. That's all they do. They don't build structural design in biology. It's never been observed. We don't see that. There's no known mechanism for evolution, and there's no observable species living on today that are transitional. If there were, and the last point, if evolution had been true, then let me just say this boldly and clearly: evolution cannot be true. Because DNA is a four-dimensional package of overlapping and nested, highly compressed information that reads forward in.
Don't worry. Hey, P. Tango, you'll get your chance. Don't worry.
It reads forward and backward. It is strand hopping. It is highly compressed, and it possesses algorithmic processes which require intentionality and forward thinking, and it's more has linguistics properties of phonetics, semantics, punctuation, syntax, grammar, and semiotics. The grammar of human DNA is more complex than that of any spoken human language, and its grammar, its linguistics properties are more complex than Zipf's law of linguistics, which is a mathematical equation that requires intelligence. So, because we know DNA is a product of intelligence because of its properties, which cannot be produced by non-intelligence, evolution cannot be true.
Can I have 20 seconds?
Yes, P. Tango, because you did yield some of your time in your previous rebuttal. Go ahead.
So just to answer this, Gish Geller, basically, Neff is looking at skulls. He only looks at skulls. What does this Tong child's pelvis look like? What does his spine look like, and all that sort of stuff? And can we refrain from changing the subject from the morphology of skulls and bones to DNA? That's
well, the only reason we ended up bringing up some arguments against DNA was because David brought up the claim that DNA proves human evolution. So just in order to address everything, but P. Tango, I don't want to interrupt you. So is there any other final words you want to say?
Okay, yeah, let me get my turn.
Well, not only that, I asked for the evidence for evolution. I didn't ask for the bones of evolution. So anything goes.
What are you saying? Are you serious?
Okay, guys, let's move.
Let me address.
Okay, real quick. Actually, what we'll do is we'll move to C. Brown and then David, And then David, you get after C Brown. David, you go as much time as you need as well. So C Brown, it's all yours, brother.
So I want to address David's assertion about Sediba. Okay, first of all, it's not the creationist that's debunking the human evolution. It's the evolutionist himself. Like an example, Yoel Rock and Ella Bean of the Tel Aviv University, they looked at Sediba. First of all, a little background history. Lee Berger, straight out fraud. Okay, so when we look at the two different skeletons, the HM1 and the HM2, the HM1 belonged to a man, belonged to the adolescent male. They basically said that it was strikingly similar to that of Boy, which is clearly human. Okay, so Boy, the HM1 to be very, very similar to a human male, okay, which is Boy, and then the HM2 was very similar to that of Australopithecus. So basically, you have two different skeletons, one belonging straight to a human, then the other one of the same species, but the female looking like an Australopithecus. Okay, so what does that tell you? That's tell you that basically you're finding bones, okay, and you're just allocating bones to certain species when they don't even belong. That's the whole premise of evolution. Saying this bone belonged to this person and it absolutely did not. So, like I said, it's not us, it's them saying that. You know, Sediba is a mixed bone bag, not mosaic, like it's leaning toward this, but completely different. The last point I want to make is this here. Every single case where we can look at if it's a human or if it's an ape, it's because we have enough skeletal records, enough of the skeleton that can provide evidence if it's a human or ape. It's the transitions, the ones that they put the artistic licensing on, that you only have 20%, 30%, crushed hips, crushed skulls, that you're reconstructing and you're saying, oh, this is a transition. Why is that, David? Why is the transitions the ones that's crushed and scattered, but the ones that we know is human, the ones we know is Australopithecus, are the ones with the high number of skeletal remains? Answer that question.
Okay, thanks so much. Thank you, Brother C. Brown. Lots of great points. Good job, everybody. David Neff, on to you. However much time you need. Go ahead.
Oh, it's David's turn, ain't it? Yeah, go ahead, David.
All right, yeah, sure. So there's a lot to talk about. I'm first going to go back to hominidity because there's.
No, dude. That's the point, man. Okay, I'm
shut
sorry.
up for just 1 minute, please. It's my turn to talk. Thank you very much.
Okay, go ahead. Okay.
We're going back and forth between a whole bunch of different things.
All right, go ahead.
Shut up for just 1 minute, please.
All right.
Okay, go ahead, David.
Sure. So yeah, this is one of the problems about going a million different topics an hour and jumping back between different topics. I want to kind of continue the discussion on hominidity. Here's two papers actually in the Answers Research Journal. Hominidity, probably not part of the human holobaramin based on barometric reanalysis, including postcranial evidence. Quotes, with postcranial data on morphological characteristics of hominidity available, a more precise barometrological analysis and clarification is possible for this species. Opinions among creationists as well as evolutionists are divided as to whether H. naledi is a new species, crucial to the group Homo, or whether it could be an already discovered member of the genus Homo, or even a species of ape or an Australopithecus. With the inclusion of 37 postcranial morphological characteristics, this work attempts to reassess the barometric classification of H. naledi. It is important that knowledge of morphology balances statistical consideration in order to provide a more holistic classification of species within a holobaramin. According to the result, no significant continuity exists between H. naledi and Homo sapiens and Homo neanderthalensis. However, a moderately positive correlation exists between Homo naledi and Australopithecus Sediba. Compared to the previous barometric analysis, H. naledi has shifted away from the Homo baramin towards an A. Sediba. although final results still remain tentative. Furthermore, characteristics of the hand, upper limb, and feet show that these two species were similarly adapted to arboreal locomotion as well as a form of terrestrial bipedalism. Also, a partial variant of the BDIST software was devised to allow a weighing of morphological characteristics, end quote. And then further evidence that Hominin is not a member of the Homo habilibaramin based on the measurements of vertebrae and ribs. Quote, a recent debate within creationist circles has reached a new point about the baraminic statues of Hominin, a new primate species discovered in South Africa. Initial studies based on craniodental characteristics suggested that H. is probably a member of the human holobaramon. However, subsequent analysis of the postcranium have cast this original statement into doubt. Analysis of the thorax, upper limbs, eyes, and foot of the Hominin suggests that this species shows continuity with Australopithecus and discontinuity with the human holobaramon. The present study analyzes 5 characteristics of the atlas and axis, as well as 22 characteristics of the Antipolymate and
Lee Berger. Lee Berger discovered that, right?
Jason,
Hey.
Yeah, we're just doing uninterrupted time right now, Jason. But Jason, we're going to get you in on it too now that you're back, brother. Okay, keep going, David.
All right, sure. So the present study analyzes 5 characteristics of the atlas and axis, as well as 22 characteristics of the Antipolymate and the Penulomate thorax vertebrae. The result shows statistically significant continuity between the 2 members of the human holobaramon, as well as continuity between the Hominin and 3 Australopithecus species, as well as Paranorthropus robustus. Analysis of the 22 characteristics with weight reinforces already existing baraminic relationships. More importantly, statistically significant discontinuity is shown to exist between members of the human holobaramon and the Australopithecine baramin. Fresh evolutionary dates assigned to H. naledi of 236,000 to 335,000 years, which are 3 times younger than. So, this study provides further evidence that Hominin is indeed not a member of the human holobaramon, but rather related to the Australopithecus. So again, these are creationist papers themselves. And C. Brown, I'm not reading a script. I'm literally reading the journals themselves.
Okay, are you good, David?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to make just make sure that you can see my slides now here too. So as Brother C. Brown was saying, this is everything David just said has been challenged, has been refuted essentially. For example, Sediba, it's not us. It's my turn. I'm not sure who just talked there, but so what Brother C. Brown said is not creationists making it up. You can see a recent paper and the associated article regarding Australopithecus sediba. Human missing link fossils may be jumble of species. The associated article says, one of our closest long lost relatives may never have existed. The fossils of Australopithecus sediba, which promise to rewrite the story of human evolution, may actually be the remains of 2 species jumbled together. So, for example, a lot of these Sediba, habilis, some of the Australopithecine, like Lucy, there's always mixed bones of multiple species that the paleo experts themselves agree with, because these are all being found in bone beds where oftentimes there's over 90 different species in there. For 40 years, there was a baboon bone that was associated with the Lucy, the Australopithecus, and they just recently discovered, oops, baboon bone, time to take that out. Yet it took them 40 years to realize it. Here, an abundance of developmental anomalies and abnormalities in the Pleistocene people. This is a really recent paper, 2018. Eric Trinkos has given corroborating evidence for my hypothesis that Neanderthal, Erectus, Naledi, for example, Heidelbergensis, Floresiensis, the hobbits, were the result of pathology, disease, and accelerated genetic degeneration. And this is expected post-flood, post-Babel. You got all of these different people groups break off. Some are isolated, results in inbreeding, founder effects, and rapid genetic degeneration. Homo naledi, David, you're arguing from older data. Endocast scans have now revealed that Homo naledi was 100% human. It was just an isolated population of very tiny, genetically compromised human beings. These are the facts. The features that are so-called primitive in these hominins, oftentimes they're found in modern humans, like pygmies, for example, and the skull shape, oftentimes found in modern humans. But the so-called primitive features are the result of pathology and disease. And this is even concluded, corroborating evidence from Eric Trinko's himself, who's a paleo expert. 75 documented anomalies or abnormalities from 66 individuals. He concludes the probability of finding this density of rare developmental abnormalities in recent human samples of comparable size is again vanishingly small. You can even see in the Neanderthals that the paleo experts themselves are concluding that they were highly inbred. They suffered from high genetic load, 40% less fit than human beings, all due to inbreeding post-Babel. Now, of course, the evolutionists themselves are not making that conclusion because they can't read in between the lines, but they're admitting that this amount of pathology in the fossil record, the human fossil record, is rare. When it comes to Naledi, for example, the features that are often pointed to, like the flaring hips, the hands and feet, the small brain volume, like I said, some of those anatomical features are not that unique as they're seen in humans, but your primitive features, like I said, like the curved finger bones, can be due to environmental conditions and pathology and genetic degeneration. So there's no evidence here for human evolution other than extinction, degeneration, and your so-called best examples of transitional forms like Sediba and habilis are nothing more than an artificial species, mixture of human and ape bones. And it's not the creationists that are coming up with this, the paleo experts themselves. Last point, Tango there was saying we're not proving creation. We are proving creation because the genetic data, the molecular clocks, the mitochondrial DNA, the low genetic diversity, the Y chromosome, all points to a special creation of just two people 6,000 years ago, Adam and Eve. The Y chromosome between the human and the chimp, whoever goes next, I'd like an answer to this. The human Y chromosome is essentially immune to recombination, and yet, I think I got the paper here, the human Y chromosome between the chimp and the human is less than 70% dissimilar. Why is that the case? If supposedly, here it is, chimpanzee and human Y chromosomes are remarkably divergent in structure and gene content. So the Y chromosome around the Earth with humans, with males, of course, are incredibly similar, very little variation, which tells us we came from a common ancestor who's nothing like an ape and a chimpanzee, because our Y chromosomes are over 99% similar. Less than 70% similar with the chimpanzee, our so-called closest common ancestor. So I want an explanation for how that is possible. And also I want the papers that I showed regarding the pathology, the disease, the genetic degeneration in the human fossil record. I want that addressed as well. I don't want it dodged. So I'm done here. We'll move on to make it fair, another evolutionist. P. Tango, go ahead. Uninterrupted as long as you need.
Okay. Wow. All right. Let me just digest that for a little second.
Never.
Okay. So you think the dilution of species and the amazing just variance we have today happen in 6,000 years. Is that true?
Yes.
You're supposed to talk. We're not supposed to interrupt you for 6 minutes.
Tango, you can do rhetorical questions if you want, but this is your time to hopefully answer some of the questions. Because if you notice, I asked questions, but I didn't stop for you to answer during my time. I just asked them, and then hopefully you guys will address it. If not, then the audience should see if you're dodging. You can also ask questions, and if we don't answer them, then the audience will see that we're dodging. So just take your uninterrupted time, say what you got to say, ask us whatever questions you want, and then we'll answer them when it's our
Roger the tax dodger.
It won't be rhetorical. I'm happy for an answer. So what processes led to all this diversity happening just over 6,000 years? And that's not rhetorical. Answer the question.
What?
Well, go ahead, Brother Brown.
No, I'm just saying, you want us to address that, or you want to address what we presented?
Now,
because I'm sorry. Do you want us to address what we presented?
We could address that after you've talked for 10 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. Pete Tango, why don't you address
6 minutes?
end it with a couple questions, and then once it's our turn, we'll address it.
Okay, everybody stop. This is not rhetorical. Is it my time?
It's your time, exactly. So.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you was asking the question. I apologize.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So, what processes let all that diversity happen over just 6,000 years?
Okay, you want a question? You want an answer to that right now?
Why are you being so dodgy? Just
because this is your time. Okay, if you want us to take some of your time, okay, ask the question and I'll answer. I can't tell if you just want your full time or you want us to answer. Ask the question and I'll be happy to answer. Go ahead.
10 times. Okay. What processes happened that let all this Earth biological diversity happen just over 6,000 years?
Easy. So, for example, the evolutionists, the evolutionary community.
Why evolution?
Because there's a vast difference. We have different starting points. Let me ask the question, or let me answer the question. Evolutionists assume that all DNA differences, nuclear DNA differences, mitochondrial DNA differences, are the result of mutations and genetic mistakes over time. We challenge that. Our position is the vast majority of our genomes are created functional DNA differences because according to our model, why would God create Adam and Eve to create clones? Of course, he would have created Adam and Eve with pre-existing functional DNA differences that through shifts in heterozygosity to homozygosity and different processes, of course, that can explain every shade of skin you see on the planet today. So therefore, the genetic diversity you see today could have been built in and front-loaded into Adam and Eve. It doesn't require deep time accumulation of genetic mistakes, and that makes predictions on DNA function, for example, speciation rates, mutation rates, and many of those predictions are coming true. So that's an answer to your question. In short, the genetic diversity can be built into Adam and Eve at creation. Makes sense scientifically, makes sense theologically. Go ahead.
So how does it make sense scientifically? And
because I just said, because it leads to testable predictions on DNA function. If the vast majority of these DNA differences really were created by God, they were front-loaded, we should predict that they would be functional. The DNA elements like the ERVs, the retrotransposons, the pseudogenes, those should be functional as well. And that's exactly what we find. But evolutionists say that over 80% of our genome is junk because it's based on genetic mistakes over time. So here's two.
I don't care. I care what you say. So what processes happened that made all that diversity possible?
I just told you that genetic diversity was built into Adam and Eve in the original. What do you mean processes? Once you have the genetic diversity, all you need for adaptation and change is the same mechanisms we see today, natural selection acting upon random variation. But that random variation that evolutionists say is all due to mutations, we're saying most of it is actually due to initial design, and predictions flow from that, and we see those predictions are coming true. So the same process that you guys would look to.
So if for something to actually change so dramatically over 6,000 years, what sort of mutation rate would need to happen?
Good question.
It's not mutation.
It's not based. It's front loaded. It's front loaded.
Stop.
Epigenetic.
Mutation. What is it?
Okay, so like Brother Jason said, a lot of it is epigenetic. That's what we're seeing. I mean, there's over 1 million on and off switches in our genome that you can see rapid adaptation just through to environmental changes, conditions. For example, we're seeing new species. So, for example, when we look back to the creation event, we're looking back to the expansion of genetic information because the changes we've seen have been due to reductions in genetic information. Therefore, those speciation events we see, it's typically due to a loss of allelic variability, a loss of genetic information. But according to the evolutionists, when they look back billions of years ago to their single-celled ancestor, they're looking at the contraction of the information because they need the buildup of genetic complexity and the expansion of new genetic information. It's opposite. That information, according to the creationist model, was already built in, and we've had a reduction. We've had the reshuffling, for example, through recombination, gene conversion, to produce all the variety quickly. If those DNA differences are built in, at creation, new varieties can occur quickly.
So it can just happen. Like everything we see now through plants, animals, bacteria, the whole gamut of biological life happened over 6,000.
How did a single cell get all that biodiversity on Earth? How did it do that?
Why is we talking?
Okay, so to answer your question quickly, as I was saying in a nutshell, if we have these, so I'm saying created DNA differences front-loaded. In technical terms, they're created heterozygous, okay? That means an almost limitless variety of combinations of chromosomes. I'm hearing, is that you? Who's the background information coming from?
Why are you saying created?
Not for me. I've got mine muted.
So if we have these heterozygous ancestors, like our position would state, that means a pretty well a limitless variety of combinations of chromosomes, genes, and traits are possible, just even in 1 or 2 generations. Shuffle up those DNA differences through recombination, gene conversion, boom, you got new varieties of combinations of traits quickly, since they're already built in, as I said. The point is, this leads to testable predictions, mutation rates on mitochondrial DNA, and the mitochondrial DNA takes us back just 6,000 years. So I'm not really sure. I can screen share I got tons of slides on the number of species we see.
I'd like to screen share something when you get around.
Wait a second. So what you're saying is all the diversity on Earth in every biological system happened over 6,000 years.
Well, I'm going to play a different method here just because I don't want to just reiterate everything I said. Can you just reiterate the position that I laid out regarding front-loaded genetic diversity? And I think you'll answer your own question. Go ahead.
Are you saying that mutations and gene happen really, really quickly?
No. Okay. I'll start off by asking this. How do evolutionists explain?
Hang on.
Real quick. It's a simple question. How do evolutionists explain the origin of genetic diversity? By mutations over time. All those DNA differences that we see in all laws of life, mutations, genetic mistakes over time. That's why they say speciation events should take a long time. You got to build up those genetic mistakes. But we're suggesting that those DNA differences are not all the result of mutation over time, because Adam and Eve would have been created heterozygous. Those DNA differences would have been built in and front-loaded. So all that genetic diversity that you're looking at, that you are assuming takes millions of years to generate, that's assuming they're all the result of mutations over time, when we're suggesting otherwise. So you got to understand the creation model in order to argue against it. Go ahead.
So basically what you're saying is that Adam and Eve were like super DNA loaded, and they had everything ready to rock and roll.
Well, it's not even that. So, for example, the DNA differences that we see today, any 2 people, it's only a few million DNA differences that are actually different. There's only about a few million. So if you actually take all of the SNV,
I agree with that. I totally agree with that. I totally agree.
So if we have within ourselves about 3 million DNA differences, take all the DNA differences across the planet, the people groups, that's about 10 million. You put 10 million DNA differences into Adam, and you got your explanation for all of the DNA diversity across the...
How quick does it happen?
Pardon?
How quick does it happen? Like you're having a mutation every week that can like push you towards a new species, or...
Actually, are you mutate? Well, a lot of the variation wouldn't be due to mutation. It would just be due to...
Let me change. Are you having a variation every week that can just make you change out of your population group?
Well, okay, so hypothetically, any 2 people, my wife and I, we could hypothetically have millions of children that would all be different, because we are heterozygous to an extent. Yeah. So every generation, our offspring is different. So you take that back to Adam and Eve, and you give them 10.
Hey, I'm sorry, standing. David did put a note, and when it's his turn to speak again. So this is kind of, honestly, what happened was they totally went off point. Yeah. Well, they totally went off point, because David did make a point about, about Sediba and Naledi. Then he wrote a long script. He didn't address anything that he didn't address. We answered the question. Then it was Teangelo's turn to speak, and he completely changed the whole subject. I think we need to stay
I think we
pointed.
got to go back on track. Yeah, you know what? I kind of like what we were doing there because it wasn't chaos. Pete Dangle, take as much time as you need, and then we're going to jump to David, and then we're going to go back to that. We're going to go back to what we were
get
doing.
off track.
If you can't answer it, I'll yield the floor.
But standing 1 second, we got to have some kind of rules. We need to have some kind of rules. We can't have nobody throwing 99 points at us, and then when you address the point, they change the subject to something else. We can't have that. It's got to be a pointed discussion. A pointed discussion.
You're absolutely right. So let's go to Pete Tango. Make a few points.
No, I think it's David's turn, ain't it?
Yeah, you know what?
And then Nephilim's point.
See, Ron, you're absolutely right. Let's go back to the way we were doing it, so it's not chaos. Let's try and stick to just a few points, few times. See, the thing is,
that other guy who makes so many points.
Okay, so like C. Brown said, real quick, because we've all thrown so many points now, and now we're starting to address each other's points. Let's not bring up anything new. Let's now try and address what's already on the table. Okay.
Okay, but hold on, Stanley. Let's go back to the point. Let's go back to the point that he was making when he said about the creationists couldn't agree with who Sediba was, and then the point that I made back at him, as far as the fossils is concerned, that the main problem with the evolutionary fossil record is the fact is that all the fossils that point to human or point to Australopithecus, they're like 80% complete. But the ones that do not point, the ones that add the artistic licensings, are like about 20 to 30%. We need to start right there. And David need to answer, why did he believe that these transitionals were transitionals when these bones are found in mixed bones beds and they're completely incomplete? Let's start there and then let's move from there if that's possible.
Actually, that's a really good idea, especially because David was the first to bring up those hominins. So, just because, in case David thinks we're lying, I'm even going to screen share while he's talking. I want the audience to see the paper and the article associated with it from the paleo experts themselves that conclude Sediba is a mixture of human bones and ape bones. I've documented this in my recent book on human evolution. So, David, it's now on to you. Take your time. Please address what's already been discussed, and then we'll go from there. Go ahead, David.
Excellent. So a lot of points that need to be addressed. I guess I'll start with the fossils since that's where I kind of began. Science is a messy process. Mistakes are made and eventually mistakes are corrected, and that is especially true in paleoanthropology. When we see skeletons, when we see fossils that we aren't quite sure where they go, we make hypotheses that, okay, it's this, and then we realize, okay, maybe it's something else. And that happens all the time, and that is because science is a self-correcting process. It is messy, and mistakes are made and they are corrected. That's the whole process of science. Now, about Homo Sediba, 1 minute, please. Actually, whether or not they were Homo Sediba, the one that you were talking about was a mixed bag, I don't know. I'll have to actually read the paper.
Are you able to see my screen? I don't want to interrupt you, but are you able to see the screen just so you?
NewScientist.com. Let me see. New Science, always a bad source. Human missing link fossils, maybe jumble of species. What I'll do is I'll read that in once I address a few things. Of course, that's one thing is probably not the only species that we found of Hominidini. Again, I'm quoting here from Homo Sediba. I'm going to quote here from the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History. The fossil skeletons of Sediba and from Malpa Cave are so complete that scientists can see what entire skeletons look like. So even if one of them were true, there's a lot of other skeletons as well. But again, I need to actually sit down and read it and study it. Two things I want to address that was brought up before is junk DNA. If I can I address that?
Of course, yeah. The floor is all yours, David. Whatever you want to say.
Okay, sure. So David Cummings actually said the following, who was one of the people who coined junk DNA or whatever. He said, quote, "The considerations suggest that up to 20% of the genome is actively used and the remaining 80% plus is junk. But being junk does not mean it is entirely useless. Common sense suggests that anything that is completely useless would be discarded. There are several possible functions for junk DNA." And he further says that for this reason, the term non-coding DNA is preferred. And you brought up the issue of ERVs. Yes, ERVs are co-opted. And so it doesn't quite address the point that ERVs are still endogenous retrovisors. So that still doesn't explain why we see them in the exact same location in various species. So they can become functional through co-option. So yeah, that is all that I have with my notes right now. I'm going to yield my time. I am getting tired. It's midnight here, and I will be going to bed pretty soon. So I do definitely want to thank you for having me on.
And David, I know it got a little chaotic there, and we appreciate your respectful approach and coming on. Therefore, if there are any last points you want to make, though, before you leave, feel free right now. We're not going to interrupt.
Sure. So yeah, as I said, science is always a messy process. Science is all about self-correction. Science is all about saying, okay, here's what we think might happen, and realize, okay, it's not really this, it's maybe something else. This is the beauty of science. This is why I love science. It's that desire to grow in our understanding. And just, even if I say, okay, Australopithecus maybe not it, even if I were to say that, which of course I need to actually sit down and read everything first. And if you want, can you actually email me a link to the stuff that you cited? That way I can actually sit down and read the actual peer-reviewed papers. That will be fantastic. That way, maybe next week I can come on and we can actually discuss your papers and your stuff point by point. I do actually want to ask you before I leave. You were talking about Hominin falensis and all being a result of genetic degeneration. My question for you is, was Noah, what did he look like? Was he more of a Homo sapien or something else? And why don't we see the same genetic issues in modern day humans, since we all came out of the ark with 8 individuals? So why don't we see those same problems in humans today? And how does your explanation account for the fact that Homo erectus lived for millions of years and was very diverse among themselves? So I don't quite think your hypothesis can explain what we actually find. So go ahead and take your time.
Well, let me just answer those questions really, really quick. I'm kind of going to do them in a nutshell just so I can hand it over to Brother Neff. But Noah would not have looked like a Neanderthal. He wouldn't have looked like a Hobbit. He wouldn't have looked like an Erectus. Those people groups, those anomalous features, the atypical features, the so-called primitive features, they would have occurred due to the accelerated genetic degeneration and environmental related epigenetic factors and adaptation post-Babel. So some of these groups, they migrate, they become isolated. For example, the hobbits are isolated on island and floors. Naledi, those bones were found in isolation as well. Neanderthals are oftentimes found in small tribes. So those anomalous features, atypical features that evolutionists typically point to, right? Because when they go looking for that next missing link, they want to find the most atypical feature they can to say, hey, boom, here we go. This is the next transitional from ape to human. So those all would have occurred after the fact. See, the evolutionists, they'll assume that Homo erectus has evolved over time into Homo sapiens. There's 2 out of Africa scenarios. Erectus leaves Africa. evolves independently into all your other hominins. And then erectus evolves also in Africa into modern Homo sapiens, and then they migrate, the out of Africa scenario. The biblical model is the out of Middle East scenario, where modern Homo sapiens, which is what Noah would have been, and the 8 individuals off the ark, they would have the subgroups that would have migrated. Those would have been the ones that, I guess you can say, devolved, but they're still 100% human. You know, genetic degeneration is not fun, but it's a fact of life. So they would have devolved from modern Homo sapiens. They would have been the first to go extinct. Therefore, they would be the first to be found in the bone beds and assumed by evolutionists to have evolved first. But the data, even from the paleo experts, is that they've all intermingled, interbred anyways, all these hominins, even they'll agree they lived at the same time. What you said about Erectus, that assumes he actually lived for millions of years. And yeah, there was great variation in Erectus. The paleo experts would even say that Homo floresiensis, the hobbit, is a even more degenerated variation of Erectus. So it all fits perfectly with our model, but we don't assume that the greater amount of DNA differences are the result of mutation. So we wouldn't have that inbreeding problem. We would have it with those subgroups because they became isolated. Those mistakes come to the forefront. The mutation rates are faster. So yeah, that makes sense. But the modern Homo sapiens, they're mostly built of pre-existing functional DNA differences. So that's everything in a nutshell.
Okay, sure. So regarding the millions of years, I think you and I should have a separate debate on the age of the Earth and the age of the universe. I think that would be a fascinating debate to have.
I agree, David. That would be fun.
So what do you want to schedule?
Let's make that let's make that our next
fun as line on a bed of nails.
So yeah, if you want to make that our next debate, send me an email and let's set up a time to do a debate on radiometric dating and the age of the universe. And I'll be bringing up like basically radiometric dating, straw rate stuff, and all of that. So with that, we definitely should set that up. I'm heading out. Good night, everyone.
Okay, good night, David. Thanks so much. I'm going to throw it over to Neff to take over. I'm going to sit back for a while. I'm getting kind of tired. So go ahead, Brother Neff.
All right, thanks for screen sharing. You know, ERVs, oh my goodness, there's so much to be said about that. You know, how many times do we have to repeat to evolutionists that what are allegedly viral DNA sequences inserted into human DNA for their common ancestor has been discovered to have critical function in the in development of human organs specific to a human? I mean, it's not logical to believe that the information in the DNA of a virus could have the information necessary to regulate complex sets of genes to develop an organ of a human being, which is vastly more complex than the genome of a virus. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. It's like believing that the owner's manual. It's like believing that the owner's manual for a bubblegum machine is going to have the instructions for regulating the information to assemble an automobile. You got to be kidding me. Okay, so that's enough about that. But now I'll address this Homo Sediba, Australopithecus Sediba issue. Several years back, evolutionists hailed Sediba, and they held it in very high regard as a transitional form to man. But there's all kinds of crazy problems with it. For example, what you see on the screen now is screen captures from a video I made about Sediba several years back, about 7 or 8 years ago now. And one of these organisms you see on the screen is Australopithecus Sediba, and the other is an orangutan. Which one is which? Well, the one on the right is an orangutan, and on the one on the left is Sediba. So evolutionists they pull ape skulls from the ground and then declare them to be transitional forms.
What's that pelvic for?
That was a chimpanzee skull. That was a chimpanzee skull. This one is an orangutan skull, and there's Australopithecus Sediba right next to it.
What's that pelvic for?
So let me finish my discussion, please. Well, I'm happy to answer your questions when I'm through presenting this. So that's an example of evolutionists picking out ape bones out of the ground and then claiming that they show transition to humans. They don't do any such thing. So here's a chimpanzee skull in Australopithecus sediba. It has 8 teeth. They're nearly identical. Identical.
Oh my God.
Oh, listen, be quiet and allow somebody to talk, okay? You'll have your chance, okay? All right, so now one of the things that makes...
He's already had his chance. What are you talking about?
One of the things that that evolutionists use for assumptions when they dig up these skulls out of the ground and then point to them and say, look, this is very human-like. What you see on the screen now is 2 chimpanzees. One of them is about a year old, and the other one is like 15 years old. So something very strange happens when a chimpanzee grows. As a chimpanzee grows, its muzzle also grows. It gets longer. The older a chimpanzee is, the longer its muzzle is. So if an evolutionist digs up an adolescent ape, especially an extinct species of ape, out of the ground, and the skull is human-esque to some degree, at least in the mind of the evolutionist, they'll look at that and they'll see transition, but all they're digging up out of the ground is an adolescent ape. And this is likely the case with Afarensis as well. It's an adolescent extinct species of ape, and its features are strict. Please be quiet for a minute. And I'll address that if you'll be kind enough to let me speak. Okay, so what they'll do is dig up ape species, especially extinct ones and young ones, and then they'll say, look how human this looks. This was a transitional to humans, but it was nothing but an adolescent ape. So if you examine the bones of this Australopithecus sediba, you'll see that it's nothing but an ape. That's all it is. Here's a chimpanzee skull in Australopithecus sediba. I mean, it doesn't have any human-esque features at all. It's strictly ape. Can you just be quiet for a minute? Thanks.
We're back to the subject.
We're on the subject. If you'll just be quiet for a minute, I know this really hurts. You just have to. Look, I've been on the mic less than a minute of talking without you constantly talking. All right. Yeah, you didn't do that. Standing Up for Truth was on the mic for 5 or 6 minutes, and you weren't complaining. But now you just want to continuously talk. Why don't you just let me finish, and then you will talk about whatever you like. Okay, we'll talk about pelvises if you want. So this is strictly 8 features because that's all it is. Okay, so the organism doesn't show any features that are transitional. It's just an ape. That's all Sediba is. It's just an ape. And so now if you want to talk about the pelvis, the pelvis was not recovered as far as I understand. They didn't recover the pelvis, but we don't need the pelvis because we have the skull. And then look at the skull.
You were saying those are 2 chimpanzees. You need evidence. Where's the pelvis and where's the spinal column?
We don't have to have that. All we have is the skull. All we need is the skull. That's enough because we can see by comparing it to chimpanzees that this was nothing but an ape. It's not transitional to humans. Look at the jaw. The jaw of that thing. It's massive.
That's all you need. That's all you need.
That's strictly an ape. That's all that is.
That's all you need.
That's all I need. That's right. There's nothing transitional about it.
It sums up the creationist experience.
It's an ape skull. It has 8 teeth. It has an ape jaw. It has an ape brain case. It has an ape brow ridge. It has an ape muzzle. It has everything about it is ape.
Where's its pelvis?
We don't need the pelvis.
Why?
Because we have the skull. The skull proves it's just an ape.
Is it walking upright or is it on all fours?
With a skull like that, it could not be upright. It would not have the physiology of an upright walking creature if it had a skull like that. Are you telling me chimpanzees are bipedal?
So you're saying that because you can look at the skull, you can work out how they
Oh, he's bipedal.
Absolutely. We can look at the skull and tell that this is strictly an ape. And apes are not bipedal. They can walk upright for a very limited amount of time before their thigh muscles become exasperated. And then they have to go down on their knuckles again because their knees don't work the way, and pelvis doesn't work the way an upright.
What are the advantages of walking upright?
He's got the intelligence of a chimpanzee, and he's
You
bipedal.
need a pelvis. You need a pelvis that that flares out to the
question.
flares forward. I'll answer if you listen.
Did you not hear the question?
You need a pelvis that flares forward instead of out to the side.
What are the advantages?
You need a locking knee joint. You need the angle of the thighs towards the towards the knees. Listen, do you want to just? Do we just want to just talk over each other constantly, or do you want to listen to my answer to the question you asked? Well, why don't you be quiet and listen? I'm giving the answer.
All right.
Can you be quiet long enough to listen to the answer?
Sometimes your answers go for a long time, though.
Well, every evolutionist says that about me when I get my third sentence out.
And the common denominator is
why don't you just be quiet and listen to the answer?
You know what brevity is?
Why don't you be quiet and listen to the answer?
All right, I'm sorry, go for it.
Be quiet and listen to the answer.
Okay, can I restate my question?
Okay. No, you asked it. I'm going to answer it. If you'll just
what was my question?
If you'll have the courtesy to be quiet.
No.
You asked, what do we need to show a bipedal organism? I'm trying to explain that to you. Okay, listen, I'm just going to ignore you talking and go on answering, whether you talk over me or not, okay? If you want to be a jack, you know what? You just go right ahead, okay? So these are the things we need to show that a set of bones is bipedal and a humanoid in form. You need a pelvis with iliac blades that curve forward. You need knees that don't angle inward like a limb walking tree limb swinging creature. You need legs that point straight down like a human being. You also need a locking knee, okay? And those are the features you need. We haven't found anything transitional between humans and that, but what we do have is this fossil of Australopithecus sediba, which is clearly that of an ape, likely chimpanzee.
Yeah, really.
So if evolution were true and humans evolved from some ape-like creature, where's the fossil evidence of that? Because nobody has any. We just don't. We have apes, and we have dead human tribes that are now extinct. They're human. The features are human, or these, and over there we've got purely apes. There isn't anything in between. There just isn't. It's in your imagination, maybe, but not in the bones. We don't have the bones.
These little evolutionist comic books. Little comic book drawings and comic book artists drawing little artist pictures and conceptual pictures and stuff like that.
So let me show you a few examples of human variation. There's David Bowie in a mugshot when he was arrested. Okay, this is Larry. Wait a minute, right here is. Wait a minute, this one's a good one. This is let's see here. This is Larry King, the famous talk show host. Look at the slope of this guy's forehead. Incredible. The variation in human beings is incredible. This is actor, I can't think of his name right now. And now this one is Morris. What's his name? He was in the Doors, the lead singer. I've forgotten his name. Look how straight up his forehead is. He has a short forehead, but it's flat as a door. Remember the other ones that I showed you? Very angled. This is another one. Look at the angle of this man's forehead. Incredible angle to it. So there's tremendous variation in humans, and there's variation in apes. But what we don't have, Jim Morrison, thank you. But what we don't have are transitional bones that show organisms evolving from something that's ape-like to humans. We don't have that. We have tremendous variation in human skull shapes. We have variation in ape skull shapes. We don't have anything in between. And we don't have any humans with a muzzle, anything like that of an ape. So, or a jaw, or teeth. You ask yourself, how did teeth evolve? So that the cusps of the upper and lower teeth match, but not perfectly, else you couldn't grind food. How does that work? By random mutation? How do random mutations match up the cusp of the upper and lower teeth 32 times? 16 sets, rather? How does that happen? Random mutations, natural selection. Oh, that tooth wasn't good enough. It wasn't close enough to the one on the bottom. I better change that. Wait a minute, the bottom one's not quite good enough for that one. We're going to eliminate that guy for a tooth. Natural selection, we're gonna eliminate him. These are gonna survive more because their teeth are gonna survive more because they're more matching in each other. How does that work? By random mutation.
Sorry, I'm just going to interject. How do you explain wisdom teeth?
Human beings are smaller than they were in the days of the flood. We've gotten smaller, and our jaws can't hold all our teeth anymore. So our bodies responds to that by not expressing the gene that puts that tooth in our jaw. And except in some human beings, it still comes forward.
We don't use our teeth as tools like we used to. Like we used to grab rope and hang on to rope while we did work with our teeth, you know. Like we were just making things and spears and bindings and stuff like that. Whereas now we don't use our jaws as much, and we're not working with our jaws, so our jaws have become smaller. If you use your jaw a lot, your bone becomes bigger and stronger. Your jaw becomes bigger and stronger.
That's right. Becomes more robust. The body adapts to it. Exactly. That's the point. Just like the fossil record shows that virtually all the kinds of life were larger, enormous, grew to enormous size in the past. Roaches 18 inches long, dragonflies 2 feet wide, sloths that weighed 1,500, 2,500 pounds, and dogs that were the size of grizzly bears, etc. etc. Okay. Why should we believe humans were any different? Humans were larger in the past than they are today. Noah was probably 8 to 10 feet tall, at least 8 feet tall, maybe 11 or 12. And so he would have been huge for a human being. And if human beings have shrunk because of changes to the environment caused by the Noahic flood, just like all the other animals did, why wouldn't humans get smaller? So in the days of Noah, man may have been 9, 10, 11 feet tall, and today we're 5.5 to 6.5 feet.
Why?
But you've got a Neanderthal. You got a Neanderthal back in Western Australia that's running through mud, deep mud in a swamp, and it's carrying something because you can see it's more weight on one side, and it's running at like 47 kilometers an hour or something, 47 k's an hour through deep mud, through a swamp while it's carrying something. I think we're going backwards. I think like we're getting smaller, dumber, and weaker.
That's exactly right. Yes, and that's why we have wisdom teeth, because we got smaller. We had more teeth in the past. God designed man with more teeth than he has today. And because we've gotten smaller, our bodies have responded by making the genes for that tooth recessive so that it's not expressed. But in some people, it still gets expressed.
Why didn't God see the future and understand that we needed a certain jawline?
God designed it.
Because we live in a fallen, broken world, and not everything's got to be worked out by God. If everything was worked out by God perfectly for us, it wouldn't be a fallen, broken world, would it? And I mean, there'd be no need to restore it now, would there? And I mean, what would be the point of cursing it in the first place?
And we wouldn't need Christ either.
So, you realise people used to dye their wisdom teeth.
So what? It doesn't matter what you go through on this earth, what trouble, what trauma you go through. As long as you believe, then you'll go somewhere for the rest of eternity. You will be you won't have all of your tears and pain.